Sports and cultural institutions. There's the city park, and in front of it, a bar. There are political institutions and residential areas, churches, and in between the steeples, there's a governmental center, a bank, military institution, business, academics. There are some housing projects. Next to them are hospitals, communication centers. And at the outskirts of the city, just beyond the city limits, there is what amounts to a no man's land. And this no man's land is in between the trenches. And just beyond the no man's land and up the gradual embankment, there is an area that is unpopulated by ordinary city institutions. Somewhere up on this ridge, there seems to be the hint of a revolutionist encampment in the bushes. It is an area virgin of city influences, an area analogous to above the line of ordinary consciousness.
Not at all connected to the Bruckner Expressway. Don't ever get on the Bruckner. Or, of course, the Wagner Freeway. Story time. I have stories. And, of course, they are noticeably unrelated to anything I might say, especially tonight. First story. Let's see. It's some sort of, it's like a great international neurological convention. And one guy talks his way into, he's not a member, he doesn't claim to have any credentials, but he says he has something important to say that will interest the neurological community. But some way he talks himself into, and like on the final night, they set aside some time and they let this guy come up. And he comes up, and all he does is they give his name, and he comes up and he says, and he begins to repeat to them a continuing question, a problem that they have had in the neurobiological sciences vis-a-vis a particular operation of the brain. I'm not going to make up anything specific, but you know there's enough areas that they don't know what they're doing. I mean, they admit it, that we don't. So this guy comes up with one of them, one of the pressing, curious areas of the day that they cannot come up with anything statistically, they cannot come up with anything based upon the knowledge of the brain surgically. And so he relates to him. He says, now you people, I know that you have a question about a certain operation of the brain, and he sees many of them nod and go, yes, yes. He then commences to describe to them, and of course they're taking it as his theory. He then begins to describe to them the way that the brain might be operating that would clarify, if not clear up, if not answer this troublesome area. He describes it, they listen, and he sits down. And as he sits down, the moderator, the head brain doctor of the convention, stands up and he says, well, you know, thank you, Mr. So-and-so. Now, I'm partly responsible for letting the man speak. You know, thank you. But now I've got to tell you, I can speak for the rest of the crowd. And he says, and he turns to Mr. So-and-so, who's sitting there at the platform, let's say, and he says, I must tell you, it's interesting theory and blah, blah, blah. But perhaps, or obviously what you don't know is that I think we're all in agreement here, those of us who are in this business, this profession. What you described physically, I understood it, and I think we all understood what he said, did we not? And people in front, you know. But I think I can speak for all of them. I want to tell you that physically, you don't know this, but physically what you described physically, the brain cannot operate that way. Mr. So-and-so either thinks to himself, or if you like the story better this way, he sort of mumbles to the moderator. He says, what you just said is invalid, or else how could I have described it and you understood it? First story. Second story. A kid is, let's say, watching TV on the news. And let's say on the news there is a talking head comes up, not the band, a religious, a political leader of a country that is very religious, let's say, that's been involved with what appears to be a religious war. So here's the man, and he has just been meeting with some of his counterparts across the border where they're having this continuing conflict, been going on hundreds of years. And the man says, he's the prime minister of a country, let's say, and he says, I am pleased to announce today, as many of you know, we have been publicly meeting here in Geneva with Premier so-and-so, with whom we've been in conflict all these many years. We have been, in fact, in secret meetings even before it was publicly known. But after the last 3 days, I would like to announce that we have come to new understandings, we have made new verbal agreements, we have now written agreements in the works, and I would like to say publicly here that for the first time in almost 1,200 years, our neighbors, the good so-and-so folks, and us, are now looking at, I can say this, and I know my counterpart will have his own press conference, and will agree to, he will say the same thing. I believe for the first time in 1,200 years you're going to see peace come to this area between us nationalistically and even the religious conflicts that seem so futile to many of you. But it will all be settled. I could not be more optimistic. And the kid is fairly well read, sophisticated. The kid turns to his father and he says, I'm looking at a world leader. The man, I know who he is, I know his reputation. He has been on the public stage now a number of years. He's well respected. You and I both know that he knows as much about history as I do. I'm just a kid. How can he sit there and say that he has every absolute expectation that this problem after 1,200 years will be resolved next week when he has got to know, that that's not so? How? And the old man, whom I might say is a little out of the ordinary, but anyway, his father says, son, just assume he's being insincere. Now, I'm not here to tell you tonight that all of those people that seem to be world leaders throughout history, right up until today literally, those who appear to be, and this crosses all verbal categories, where they appear to be nationalistic leaders, religious leaders, which about does it, but if you want to try and press it further, social leaders, philosophers, intellectual leaders. But the nationalistic and the religious, once you begin to see it, that about covers it. I am not here to tell you right now that all of these people throughout history who should, at the very least, who should know better, and who have throughout history, not just in my story I made up, but throughout history, all you've got to do is turn back. 3,000 years ago, you had people in Greece. If we want to trace our lineage from there on up to here, a continuing series of men making public statements, men who were, looking back historically, and who were at the time were considered to be leaders. The people, there was no, we're not talking about someone who by armed conquest took over a throne. It's people, individuals that the people look to as our leaders. They have continually made statements and assurances similar to the story I just made up. Now all of you must know that. Now forget run-of-the-mill city cynicism, irony. That's not what we're involved with here now. But you have had everyone from poets to philosophers to religious leaders to political leaders continually making statements and assurances for which there was absolutely no basis. At the very least, there was no historical basis. There was no reason to believe this. Contraire, historically, every time somebody talks about there's going to be lasting peace. Now, one more time, forget any sort of ordinary sarcasm or cynicism toward this now. I want you to try and see this. There has never been any basis for that. And yet when it's done, there's no cynicism. I mean, forget some guy sitting around a bar drunk. The bell curve, the middle class of those involved with it and those observing it from afar that realize that it has implications to us. The news media, for instance, nowadays, which is sort of the general worldwide reaction for the middle class, they don't take it cynically. They report it. A news commentator on the network may, in fact, almost step aside from his attempt to objective relaying of the news and almost try to give some little encouragement like, God, will this be a break for humanity? If this is true, let's all wish them Godspeed. There is no basis for it. None whatsoever, and continually. Somebody has been saying, it's just around the corner, folks. Some Muslim is saying, us and the Jews will get it all settled. It's been a bloody conflict. They were saying that 1,700 years ago. They're saying that last week. 200 years ago, the Protestants, the Catholics in Ireland were making statements like that. This has been going on forever. Now the point of all this is, the general where I'm pointing for you, is life seems to produce leaders continually. People in who the rest of the city has faith. Religious, political. Especially the political, they know what's going on. They're even in direct contact, discussions with your enemies, with the foes of your nation. They're well educated. Your present Prime Minister, Sheikh, Premier, was an assistant Sheikh, was a Vice President, worked his way up. He's been through the mill. You don't really analyze it. He may be of a different party, or you may not like the size of his nose and all that. But there it is, and you and a neighboring country, a neighboring state, are in conflict, and you may have to go die. And you look to him. There he is. He's in power. And he says, I want to tell you, this has been a bloody decade. We've been killing each other, and I say it's gone far enough. 100 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years. So he says it's gone far enough. And he says, our foes, our neighbors agree. Our neighbors who have a different race, a different religion, whatever appears to be the basis of it. He says, we have now come to the point that we have got to face reality, blah, 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 blah. And there's no doubt we are on the cusp of a new age. We are on the brink of final peace between us. What is life up to have the leaders of all the various states throughout history, all of the different epochs throughout history, to say such things when there is no basis for it? Could there be some basis for my story? Now, I said I wasn't telling you that tonight. I'm not telling you what that father said of, son, just assume that he's being insincere. Now the father, I said that deadpan the first time, and I said it that time. The father was not being sarcastic. He was not attacking. He was trying to respond to this rather exceptional, I would say, kid, to ask such a question. And he told him, assume that he's being insincere. Now, I'm not here to tell you that everybody throughout history that seems to have been in any position of power, and anybody was ever in any position of power, they're not normally accused, except for political reasons, of being liars. But I'm pointing out to you that their most famous declarations, the kinds of things they're remembered for, speeches, slogans that they thought up. All you have to do is look back, whether it be 3,000 years ago, just take history as it falls, as it's recalled, or take it right now, in your lifetime, and you look back, and you're left at the city level, as always, with two possibilities. At city level, that all of these people throughout history, the leaders, are dumb. That contrary to them actually knowing more than we do, being privy to more information, having more insight, they got to know less, because there is no basis for him, our Prime Minister, to say that he sat down for 3 days and talked to that other guy, General so-and-so, running our neighboring, warring, adjoining state. There is no basis. I know this, everybody here knows this. All of his people must know it over there in the other country. There's no basis for him saying that. So he's either dumber than all of us put together and divided by 7, or they're lying, being insincere. At the city, that's your only 2 choices. Unless you're going to say mistake, that everything they made is a mistake. But now you've got to see that anything you can call something, any instance, you can call it a mistake, you can call it a toaster. But when you see there's a whole string of toasters, you got to see there's a pattern to it, if you got the right kind of intelligence. So if you keep saying like mistake, then you're going to have to realize, well, I'm not calling it the right thing. I might as well call it a toaster, because it's not a mistake. I just didn't realize it. So you're back to, as always, at the city level, at old intelligence level, those 2 choices. Now, I'm not telling you that all of the world leaders, the way that life produces them, financial experts, philosophers, religious leaders of all stripes, political leaders of all nations, all times. I'm not telling you that they're all insincere, but let me ask you this. If that were true, would that not explain a lot? Think about it, and I'll have my sip of coffee finally. Would that not explain a lot? Am I going to have to go and explain that? I guess so. Not only would that not explain a lot, since not many of you seem to see it, I'll press right on. Could you not see that as being another grand example of efficiency? That life has things moving in certain ways and continually produces genetically what is referred to, thought of as being charismatic, alive, inspiring leaders. They're everywhere. They always pop up. Any tribe, any group of people that's going to become a state of some kind will have a leader. If it does not, if some charismatic head wolf does not come out of the pack, they're not going to become a state. Their day has not come yet. They'll be like the Italian states, drifting around for years and years and years until they finally, not just them, but all sorts of other examples, but until finally there seems to be a Garibaldi or somebody that is a head wolf. Of course, the ordinary people, they call it other things. The history is with us. It's an idea whose time has come. He was the only man strong enough or intelligent enough. All it was We're talking about the same genetics, that you do not have a wolf pack ever joined together in some area until there is a wolf dominant enough that the rest of them are drawn to him like filings to a magnet. You don't have a state of men, you don't have a wolf pack. They'll just continue to drift off and they'll go find other packs where there's already a dominant, a charismatic leader. So life continually, I'm not supporting these, I'm not bragging on them, I'm pointing out the kinds of things that you people have got to see. It's not psychological, it's not historical, it's not sociological, it is biological. It's the same thing, I'm not exaggerating, it's the same thing as a wolf pack. You either got a pack hanging together that's going to have some life, and they're going to give birth to kids, and they're going to set up their own range, they're going to establish their own territory, but it will not without a Garibaldi, without a Caesar, without Fido the First. I could have said Lon Chaney the First, if any of you who like obscure jokes. So life produces these people for its own reasons. It is a part of the living process, the living organism, a necessary organ in the cellular structure of humanity. And every time, if any of you this is getting a little off, you people on your own should be able to begin to see such as this. The idea of, out of a group of splintered up states and borders being pulled here and there, since I used Italy, and it only really became a state in this sense we call it nowadays in this century. It is not a political happening. It was not an economic certainty. It was not a sociological foregone conclusion that eventually this would happen. Life has its own purposes, and it has nothing to do with politics, and it's got nothing to do with Italians or Romanians or Hungarians. That's the way it appears to city consciousness. But every time it needs to collect up a group of people and, in this case, make an Italy, whenever it does, there will always be a head wolf. There will always be a recognized leader that a large percentage of the people that's going to become that group, that pack, that nation, they just immediately pay allegiance to. And every one of them tell them things that they have got to know better. Looked at from city level. Here is this guy, he pulled us together out of the woods. He pulled us from these splintered little warring families and factions. And through the strength and determination of his will, the keenness of his intellect, the compassion of his heart, turned us into a nation. And what did he do immediately? They don't say it this way. He began to tell us tales that, except nobody sees that. They see it as inspiration, insight. He says, here is going to be where we as a new state will go. This is our destiny. Here is what history shows is in store for us. And all you've got to do is look, and you'd say, well, all right, the man in some way inspires me, and he is a living example of charisma, but the man, some way, he is charismatic, but he's dumber than my kid brother. Either that, or he's being insincere. He doesn't mean a word of that, because he has got to know better, right? Can I have a second sip? And you think about it a second. You people that might be seeing me in these kind of tapes for the first time, let me assure you this has nothing whatsoever to do with politics, and it especially has nothing to do with sarcasm. I have not caught life with its pants down. Things are just right. Things are moving swimmingly well. But this is the sorts of things that if you're going to get past the limits that are holding you where you are, what you're wanting to do, no matter what you think this is about, you have got to be able to begin to see such as this. Life is up to something. It's right in front of your eyes. But as long as you're dealing with the language of the city, as long as you're dealing with old intelligence of believing such things as politics has something to do with politics. It has to do with biology. or to believe that religion has something to do with religion. It has something to do with the cellular basis of the human nervous system. Or to believe, well, that economics is one of the determining factors in the history of man. Economics is the movement of molecules in the human brain. But then you've got to be able to look at such things as, once I pointed out, and if you belong here, I've pointed out enough. I'm not going to keep making examples, that throughout history, the leaders, and I don't mean just political, religious, the Moseses, Jesuses, Buddhas, Muhammad's, everybody that seemed to inspire, if you look at history, as much or more so than any political leader or most of their contemporaries. And what did they tell you? What did they tell the people? I mean, if you think that the political examples I made of somebody saying, well, we have every reason not to believe that will be peace after 2,000 years between us and this other group. And the kid goes, how can he say that? When even I'm a kid. There is no basis for that man saying that unless he's going to say, well, I had a divine revelation from the guides. But then there's no historical basis for that. Well, since when did you start having divine revelations? You're out here running for office. You used to be a ward healer down here. You used to help stuff the ballot boxes. Since when does God start? The kid says there's no basis for them saying this. Most of you thought you saw what I was pointing at generally, but look at it religiously. If you want to see it even worse, a better example. That they just suddenly say, once life apparently is produced this charismatic figure with some little group of people, some group of Jews, some group of Indians, some group of whoever. And this guy, instead of saying we're going to become a state, he says things like, the gods have given us a manifest destiny, and they sent me here to lead you and to tell you what to do so that when you die, you won't die. And they go, wow. And if the kid had been watching that on TV and seen Moses or Jesus or Muhammad, this same kid, I suggest you would turn to his dad and said, you know, I've heard about this guy. And that guy admit that when he first came on, he was doing whatever that little shtick is he's doing. It even intrigued me, Dad, but what he just said, how in the world can he tell those? I mean, if he knows something, how can he tell them something like that that there is no basis whatsoever for? None. The things I just said to you, which I just gave across sort of current of the kind of religious scenarios that all prophets turn out. If you looked at it, just as the kid, you would have to say, well, this guy seems to have something. He got some kind of little something. The guy's going place, ain't no doubt. I see why thousands of people, I see why people are talking about him. But what he just said, if that's his message, now I'll go from the political to the religious. The kid would ask his father, how can he tell them that when he's got to know better? And what would the father have said? Would that not explain a lot? Would it not be very efficient that life is operating in a certain way, apparently, the way it is perceived, the way it is described by men, that life goes a certain way, and then life continually puts forth these leaders, religious, political, and they say things that seem to put a certain amount of, shall we say, frosting on the cake, oil on the water. They seem to trim the sails. They hold out hope, not just some vague hope. They declare hope. They state that tomorrow is a new day when everything that life is doing from that point right up to contemporaneously with that would lead no reasonable kid to believe it. But nobody but a kid would say, Dad, how can he say that? He's got to know better. If he is who he appears to be, if he's actually Minister so-and-so, Prime Minister, he's actually President so-and-so, if he's actually that prophet so-and-so, that religiously, if that's him, is that him? If that's him, what's going on? Because he's got to know better. You don't see that as being such a tasty example of efficiency Not on the trot, on the run. Maybe even almost taking off. Around 160 miles, nautical miles. It's about to take off. And no one sees it. And it serves a purpose. Not just the misdirection of man. It serves another purpose going on continually in the nervous systems of people. To be led, to be inspired. When? With no cynicism. Which of course takes an exceptional person, because when anybody else sees that things are supposed to be one way, especially authoritatively based, it is said that things should be this way, and I say they're not. So all you got there is hostility, sarcasm, a feeling of irony, a feeling of being misused. So it takes somebody with a different kind of intelligence to see that things are not as the life-produced leaders say they are, and to look around and realize that nobody else sees it. Also to realize this is serving a purpose. It's not hurting anybody. It's certainly not hurting me. Nobody else is going to see it. I got nothing to be mad about. I would be like a kid and go, what in the hell is going on here? And your interest wouldn't be in the guy like, well, let's show him for what he is. Let's point out, hey, the emperor's not only sans clothes, he's sans brains. He doesn't know what he's talking about. The kid didn't do that. The kid turned to somebody he thought might give him information. His father, his partner. And he says, if he's who he appears to be, how can he say that? He's not saying how, in the ordinary sense. He's saying, what in the world is going on? To what end is that guy saying this? To what end is life arranged things where he's saying that? And I, and you, Dad, may be the only ones watching this that are wondering. Because they go from him making this comment, the camera is suddenly cut to the streets. And there are people dancing, they're cheering, and people are crying. They can't believe it. They're so happy. And the kid says, there's no basis for this. How can he be doing that? What's going on? Wouldn't that explain a lot of things that have disturbed you all your life? Being the intellectual, insightful creatures you are, students you are. Things that made you mad. The continuing times that you thought the world leaders, people in some position of authority, I'm smarter than they are. Not hardly, Jack. Not hardly. Not even hardly. And yet, look, all of you have thought that. You've looked upon the head of some religion, the head of some nation, to stand there and make some comment, and you thought, am I the only one that realizes this guy is a nut? This guy is stupid. Not just walking around stupid, not neighborhood stupid, he is internationally stupid. I'm smart. I should have gone to politics or something. Not hardly. Not hardly. It just shows how dumb you are at that level. It shows how stupid you are to call him stupid. Because even though I told you I'm not telling you, he may know that what he is saying is insincere. I'm not telling you that they do. Not tonight I'm telling you that. But you're going to have to consider the possibility that all of them, some of them, may know it's either that or they are dumb. And then you're left, well, how come life keeps bringing up these guys and they seem to highly spark that will even catch me up? I don't like him. I don't like what he says. I don't like his politics. I don't like his religion. And yet one time I was at a public meeting, he was out speaking, and I got too close, and by God, I was up there, and it was like 15 minutes later I left, and it was like I'd taken a drug. I hardly remembered. I went there to laugh and to stick up my tongue, and I left. I had to almost pull myself out of there. But how can he be that way and simultaneously be dumber than me to say things to that crowd that he's got to know is not true, but the crowd doesn't know it? Not just that crowd, a whole nation. A whole segment of life's body hears one thing from one part of life's body, It gets this energy info that from one view there is no basis for it. It's not only energy now, but it is a promise of energy to come. And the recipients of the energy, the parts of the last body that's getting this particular energy and the promise, thrive on it. And yet here and there are these little bitty cells, these little kids that go, what is going on? Because there's no basis for that cell telling the rest of them that, and there's no basis for them believing it, and yet they're all dancing. Not only dancing, they're hooping and hollering. They're calling out, let's dance all night, let's dance into next week, don't ever stop the music. And it's nutsy. I suggest to you it is another one of my examples of look under my kind of dictionary if you had it under efficient, and there would be a sketch, a schematic of what I've talked about up until now tonight. That would be the example for the night of efficiency. Might I be so crude as to ask, could any of you see any possible use of this in what seems to be your internal relationship to you? All right, look at it this way. All of your life, just taking how it seems that you talk to yourself. You think that you picked it up from your religion, your parents, and etc. That something seems to be talking to you, your brain, your conscience. And it talks to you and it tells you things about, well, keep your nose to the grindstone. I know it's hard going to school, especially here at your age, when you're almost 28 years old and you're back in school and you're having to work odd hours. But by God, it'll pay off to go ahead and get your degree. And if you were just had walking around stupidity nowadays, you'd know that getting a bachelor's degree is almost meaningless. In other words, the voice of authority inside of your head says, you should. This is going to work out. It's going to be worth it. Yeah, it's hard times now, and it's hurting your social life, and etc. But once you get your degree, it's going to be worth it. If you had a kid in your nervous system, the kid would go, wait. Now, all that sounded right. The same way as this Prime Minister saying, we now have reason to believe that tomorrow will be peace. I can promise peace. From here on out, it's smooth sailing. There are those voices in you. Now, you take them as being other things. If you tried to examine it just at the city level, if you heard this, city intelligence might say, well, wait a minute. All right, maybe I'm not telling myself that. My father's telling me that. Or you might say society is telling me that. That is the common wisdom of our city, of our society, of my family. Who cares where it came from? You turn on the TV and there's a guy and they say, here is the Prime Minister of the Floyd country. The Floyd nation. And you know, you've heard his name, you've seen his picture before. You don't stop and think, and he starts saying, all right, me and General so-and-so have now come to an agreement. You don't stop and wonder, well, how did he get there? You get caught up in it, or you take it as being a relaying of real information. The same way here. You're stalling around. You're speaking the wrong language. You're looking in the wrong place to say, well, all right, the idea of the college degree, to go ahead and get my degree will help me. That's not really my doing. My father put that in me. You're almost terminally dumb. You're stuck at the old level. You'll never get out of that. I can say it doesn't matter where it came from, because I know where it came from. But I'm trying to tell you it doesn't matter where it came from, because it doesn't matter where you identify that it came from, because wherever you identify it from, right behind it's where it came from. You thought that you believe that this thought that a college degree is my entree into the good life. You say, all right, that came from my father. Or you can say, that came from my society. That came from my community. That came from my social strata. Say that. Go ahead and say it. I don't care. Say that, and I'm going to tell you this. You can say the idea came from that. I'm going to tell you what I told you last week. Behind every idea is another idea. Because that's not where it came from. So even if you say, I'm sure it is, I'm sure it is, I'm sure it is, where else would I got the idea? I wasn't born thinking, boy, when I was a little kid and still doing it in my pants, I didn't think, boy, I'll be glad when I can get potty trained so I can go to college. Because then I can get out of the house and have a good car. No, my father did it to me. My community did it. No. could begin to see, almost as the kid in my story, which is not some kind of lifetime proposition. You'll be able to do it once or twice and get most of the juice out of it. But begin to see that all the voices of authority in you, way beyond now, we'll assume, you being tied up of wanting to wrestle with the imaginary, the apparent source of them. There it is. It's just the voice of authority, like you turn on the TV and they say, here's the Prime Minister of the great Floyd nation. And there he is. You wake up in the morning, you wake up in life, and there it is in your brain. It might as well be a TV that you turn on for the first time and it announces, let's assume your name's Floyd. It says, all right, here it is. I'm speaking for me. That is, I'm speaking for you. That is, I'm speaking for me. And you say, yes? That college degree is going to pay off. And if you were the kid, you go real easily. You go, how can I tell me that? There is no basis, no factual, no historical. There's no kind of basis for me believing that me getting that degree is going to change my life. None. Not in a hostile way, not in a sarcastic way. It's like, how can I tell me this? And then, how can I believe me when I tell me this? The kid says, Dad, this guy, I know who he's supposed to be. He's got to know better. He's got to know better. How can he say that to them? And the father says, son, assume he's just being insincere. Nobody sees any relationship to the internal situation as it comes out verbally in the nervous system of man. Nobody sees any possible use for that. If not, then at least I've succeeded for the night. Insofar as I have brought up again the second language from bringing up initially night before last, let me expand a bit on that. I told you that everyone, unbeknownst to themselves, everybody on this planet has a second language, and I don't mean people that speak Spanish and have learned to speak French. That's now their language, French and Spanish. But everybody has a second language that they do not recognize. But now let me point off in a more specific direction. This is not the only thing that I intend to sketch and to hint by my initial statement that everyone has a second language, but this is one possible pointing, and it's this. And it's just one. This is not the limits to what this covers, infers. One way to look at it, though, is that everyone has a second language because there are two languages going on. There's the public language, which, let's say in our case, is English. Then there's the private language, which if your name is Floyd Dumpling, then there's the Floyd Dumpling language, or the Frederica Dumpling language, which is a private language. We got to turn the tape over. There is a public language that, at first blush, the way I'm describing it, you would think that all people in some area, in one city, one state, hold in common, which is what I intended you to perceive when I said the public language, in our case, let's say, is English. If I told someone in the city, if I told someone of old, ordinary intelligence this, they should be able to get some grasp on their own of this, on the basis of their own language, but they would get some idea of what I'm saying, that there is, in reality, they might say, yes, a public language, in our case, English. And they might say to me, you say a private language, there's everyone's individual language. I can sort of metaphorically see that, they might say. And I might say, let us, if I may, let us consider that your two eyes are your metaphorical sight, and if they went okay, I'd go. Because to you people, I'm not speaking metaphorically. There are two languages Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what your education, doesn't matter what you think about what I'm saying. There are two languages. There is the public language, and there is your private language, and it is yours. Yours, yours, yours is why I call it the Floyd or Frederica dumpling. I didn't just call it the Floyd language because then everybody named Floyd you could think had the same one. All right, the Floyd, middle initial Z, dumpling language. All right, do you understand the reason I made up such a silly name? I kind of like it though, but that there are not 2 or 3 Floyd languages going around, or 10,000. You've got a private language that is yours. It's not psychological. There's no psychological basis for it. It's not a compilation of all of your many psychic mishaps, traumas, bruises that in some way has created inside of you internally an unconsciousness that has, an unconscious mind that has these little quirks, these little Freudian slips, these kinds of projections of one idea on top of another, so that what some ordinary intelligence might tell me that I'm talking about is only that. And I would say, no, no, no. No, you didn't acquire it. It didn't come about through your experience. Insofar as you were almost born, let us say. It was a foregone conclusion that you would speak English. You were born, there was no apparent genetic or congenital defects. And your family's English or American. They speak English and they have no plans to move to Albania. So, it's almost as though it's a foregone conclusion. You're going to speak English. You're also going to speak another language. And it doesn't matter what happens to you from the day you're born. You're going to speak that language. And it's going to be, assume the little nipper that they named him, God knows why. Let's name him after you, Floyd Z. Dumpling Jr. That's the language. It doesn't matter what happens to you after that. That's the language you're going to speak privately. That's going to be your second language. Now, this not being common knowledge results in several interesting things. I think you might find them interesting. One is, the further your private language, remember it's yours, unique. And forget all these people now using unique in the second definition of the dictionary. That is, I ain't talking about sort of unique and kind of unique. I'm talking about unique. All right, singular. It's yours. The more removed your language is from the public language, the further you are removed from the middle class, from the bell curve. The difference becomes too great. Those in charge in the city, the main proponents of the public voice, begin to get very nervous about you. They will in fact take away your freedom. They'll lock up your mouth. They'll put you away. Those who become world leaders have a particular ratio between their public and their private voice that nobody knows about, including, I suggest to you, themselves. But what seems to be charisma, which there is a chemical basis for it in the same way as there is for height, quickness of tongue, fleetness of foot, there is a chemical, electrical, chemical, biological basis for leadership. But also within that is a certain ratio in those people between their private and whatever their public voice is, public language, because their public language is going to be whatever the group is that they seem to be the leader of. But there's going to be a particular ratio between their private voice and their public language, their private language and public language. Would any of you like to try and guess somewhere about what I mean by a certain ratio? What would you guess when I went to the trouble to say that there's a certain ratio I've always said there's a ratio in everybody. In everybody. That you have your private language and then you've got your public language. And there's some kind of relationship. I went so far as to point out if the relationship gets too diverse, you're in fact adjudicated to be not fully wrapped. That you're coming apart. You're not sane. You're not safe. So how would I say that these world leaders, political, religious, that there is a certain ratio? How would I go to the trouble to say that? All right, I must be inferring something. What would you... Yes, I might be inferring that, all right, how about this, that there is a greater difference between their private language and their public language than anybody. In fact, it is so far that it goes past the point of insanity. See, I was already saying if it goes too far, you're not considered sane. But am I inferring maybe that there is just suddenly, and nobody knows it goes so far that there's just no relationship, but it goes so far that even the rest of them cannot see. Now, I'm not saying that's what I'm inferring, but if I were inferring, would that give you some basis for considering my original, or one of my earlier questions, about how, the kid asked, can this guy say that when he's got to know it's not true? And the father said, well, son, assume that he's being insincere. What if it's none of that? What if his private language is so far removed from his public language that I just don't know what to say? Just what if it's so far removed that there's just almost no connection? Would that not give a whole new definition to the word insincere? Because you couldn't say the man's insincere. You couldn't say he was a liar. You'd be dumb if you knew what I'm talking about if it were true. And you couldn't say, well, what could you say? You might say, well, he doesn't even know what he's saying. But then at the city level you're left with this. But goddamn, he got in this position of authority. His people worship him. He's obviously articulate. They say he's got an IQ of over 200, and I believe it. I've met the guy. How could somebody not know what they're saying? But would that not fit my story of the father saying, son, just assume that he's being insincere? Now, I didn't say that was it, but since I said there's a ratio, then what would be the other obvious possibility? Rather than being so far that there hardly any connection, it would be like this, that they really have almost no differentiation between their private language and the public language. That is, that they'd almost be, according to what I was sketching out for you, they would almost be super sane. That what they are is just right there on the surface, and that's what makes them so attractive. That's why they're so charismatic. That there really is no great difference, hardly any. They don't really have a private language. Unless they got one, their private language is their public language. That's what makes a world leader. That's what makes a religious leader. That's why they speak with such authority. That's why they can come out there on platforms and they just come out and they inspire you just by their presence. Maybe that's it. I didn't say it. I'm telling you that there's a certain ratio. Now, I'll tell you something else. I'll tell you something flat out. People that I call the real revolutionists, what you people are trying to do, whether you know it or not, is one way to judge that is there is, amongst such people, the few that there have been and are, a particular ratio between their private language and their public language. Now, I'm not comparing it to anything I've said, but I'm telling you that there is another class, another group of people who are not recognized that there is a specific, singular ratio between their private language and their public language. Now, why did I bring all this up? Could anybody see any possible use for this right now with you? I said that the basis of me sketching out this could offer possibilities that some of you should be stricken with or peer into later. But let me do one more. Generally, the middle class, you know what I mean, the generally sane, the worker ants that keep the anthill of humanity going. The hoi polloi of the world the sane, the decent, of all stripes, colors, religions, political persuasions. Amongst themselves, they mistakenly think that the public language that they and all their contemporaries speak, they're within their tribe, their state, that they are publicly speaking the same language. Or that they should be. That is, if mistakes, miscommunication is happening between reasonable, intelligent people, like the middle class is, then the flaw is in the language somewhere, and everything that implies. Because the whole thing about having language and having a public language, that is, we're this little group and we're the Floyd nation and we speak Floridian. We're Americans, we speak English. That we are speaking the same language publicly. Now, no matter, taking my little example, and things that even psychologists could say, but taking the way I put it to you, that we're speaking English, and notwithstanding the fact that what I'm trying to convey to you, if I was an ordinary person, we're talking about some business transaction, or me trying to convince you of a viewpoint or to do something. Besides what we're saying, I know that internally, as that guy calls it, you've got a private language going on, and I do. That we've got, I guess, our own subconscious or unconscious agendas and things we may be thinking. But here publicly, especially in serious matters, matters of war, peace, religious conflict, finishing your education, in matters like this, the public voice of you and I talking together, we got to be straightforward. The whole point of having a public language is that we are speaking the same language. And so there should not be miscommunication. You might disagree. You may not like what I'm saying, but there should not really be disagreements because we're speaking the same language, and that's what public language is about. And I start off telling you what, they mistakenly believe that. I said that in our case the public language is English. But I didn't say that was the same language to everybody. People mistakenly think that the public language is a common language. And when they, at times when they momentarily may think, all right, it's not working that way right now, then life churns them up, life makes them believe, well, it should be. If for no other thing tonight, could you not see that as being an absolute sign that says, right past here, expect unbridled, uncontrolled, infinite confusion. Churning up. A little sign. Those little orange things set in the road that says, warning, humanity at work. Slow down ahead, growth in action. Someone asked me a while back a question, and it was of a personal kind of question. I've had these kind of questions. They were saying that somebody where they worked, a new employee, was bothering them. And if the person kept wanting to ask, it seemed to be, I'll put it this way, it seemed to be that the person was trying to come on to them sexually to start with. And I wanted to know, who are you? Where are you from? Where do you work here? Where do you live? And the person that wrote me here about the note, about the question, was, all right, I've tried to stop this interest, and I have done everything from give the person a cold shoulder to play like to absolutely just trying to physically ignore them. And then I even finally said, I don't like to talk like this. And they said nothing worked. Between the lines, they in fact said this, that this other person's attention seemed to increase. Dear Dr. Joe Coase, what would you recommend? That used to be my nom de plume until I think some of you looked it up one time. Not Professor Scaramouche. You can't find that in the dictionary. You used to, you couldn't. It's a word, those of you that started to say majored in English lit. But if you did, I don't want to know about it. Made me dizzy for a minute thinking about people majoring. All right, those of you who've been around a while know that I have used, in fact, things like that as examples. I have given excursions in the past, and I have described it in several ways about giving people what they put out. I have shown you how energy flows in a certain way, and that how you can not just manipulate people, that's not the point, but how you can stop people. You can stop a flow of energy and not only take care of what seems to be a personal problem, but be confronted with one of the grand opportunities to see physically, materially, the kinds of things I'm talking about, to see it in action, to do the kind of thing that you would have never done, and here goes something happening, and it goes and absolutely freezes, as though a piece of machinery locked up, and there's another human being has been just hypnotized. And the way I used to put it to you very simply was all you've got to do is do an absolute, just as crude, just as forthright imitation of that person as you can. All the way from the way they stand, the way they walk, etc. And at times I have pointed this out when I was giving out little excursions and tasks to do, or the times that I have responded to questions such as this, which I've done over the years on numerous occasions. I have even pointed out that, notice, your nervous system. Those of you that first hear that and go, that's useful information. It sounds right. Or if he says it, it seems to, I don't know, it strikes me as right. And then your intelligence can almost say, wait a minute. And you think of your own example of some guy at work, some guy that you used to know. And you think, no, all that is, that's a kind of old story about kind of standing up to a bully or something. If I went and did, that guy at work, the assistant manager, the guy that keeps coming around to my desk every morning going, God damn, how come you're never on time? All right, I heard what he said almost, but I couldn't turn around to him, like as soon as he got close to my desk and holler, don't come up my desk anymore and holler at me in the morning. No, I couldn't do it. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't get fired. Let's assume that, because that's not the worst I'm imagining right now. But I guess he would fire me after he got through what? Killing me. Your intelligence, the talking molecules in your brain and your nervous system would say that I don't know the guy that you got in mind. That sounded kind of cute and funny at first, but if I knew the example, I wouldn't go do it. Your brain tells you, and you couldn't go do it, even if you tried. It'd be suicide. And it's not. So, at the times I point that out, I have pointed this out, that if you cannot get past that point, initially with your own brain, is as far as getting out of the situation, as far as stopping this flow of energy in a certain way, then here, at least act differently. Now back to this example of the person that said they were getting untoward sexual interest from somebody, and the more they seemed to do, the more passionate the attention seemed to be. Now notice, we got two languages that I've been speaking of. There's information that is verboten. It's unavailable to either the public language or the private language. But I start pointing out, and some of you already, your little brains are guessing about what I'm about to say. At least you should. If I was going to describe this psychologically, that is, if I was going to go back and be that childish with you people, which you almost got to be when you're stuck with language, I would say, does it not strike you, let's really make it simple, that this person started showing a sexual interest in you, and that you immediately realize that's what this is all about. And so, as soon as he or she began to say nice day, not just what they said, but the way they said, I realized, and I wasn't interested. So I just gave them the cold shoulder. Then after a few days, they even verbally got more specific, like, where do you live? What part of town? Do you ever go out? Do you go out much on the weekend? Do you have a steady boyfriend? And then I got a little more specific, like, well, I wish you wouldn't ask me questions like that. I'm here doing a job, and you've just been hired. That's your job. You seem like a fine person, but I wish you wouldn't ask me personal questions. We don't know each other that well. Then he seemed to get more interested. What can I do? And I would have to ask. Not an attack on anybody that's ever asked me this question, because all of you have gone through this to some degree, whether it was sexual or not. But by now, if you were like the little kid in my story, or if you were like a reasonably intelligent person that doesn't exist, couldn't I ask you this? Couldn't I say, does it strike you as strange, even what you told me, that the more you seem to resist, the more interested they got? And you might be able to go, yeah. And there's no great boon to stop here for a long time, but I could say right now to you, well, don't you find it interesting that on your own you'd never even come up with that? That once I pointed out, you can go, yeah, that seems kind of obvious. But you would have never. There's not information in either the public or the private language to make a person's nervous system go, well, wait. The very thing that I think that I am doing to resist this flow of energy is increasing it. That is, I'll be psychological. I use those terms now. I'm trying to tell this guy, let's assume it was a woman asking, I'm trying to tell this guy I'm not interested, and that just seems to inflame him. All he's doing, helplessly, he is defining what his dance is. That the more you resist, the more he's interested. Forget that he seems dangerous, or he's got bad breath, or he's got hairs growing out of his nose. Let's assume he's fairly harmless. But to you, you're trying to resist and cut him off. And notice, your language, there is nothing in your public language, that is, out there in the psychological, the neighborhood, family, common sense knowledge to tell you this. And there's certainly nothing in your private language, that is, nothing you would have ever figured out or come up with, that would simply say, well, wait, me doing what I naturally do to somebody like him, I don't know what it is, he doesn't turn me on at all. He almost frightens me, but he doesn't turn me on. And I cannot see that in some way I attracted him just by being alive, just by being here. Not only was he attractive, as soon as I started my part of the dance, he came up and he said, let's dance. And I went, I don't want to dance. And as soon as I said that, he went, boy, I really want to dance. And then as soon as I said, wait a minute, you know, if I dance at all, I'm going to have to tell you the truth. Right now, it wouldn't be with you. And then he went, God, I have really got to dance with you now. And then when I said, hey, I'm going to have to tell you, last week I tried to tell you, but I want to tell you now, I wouldn't dance with you no matter what happened. Then the guy almost ripped off his clothes like, we got to dance. I'm going to dance with you if I die. It would have never struck anybody through their private or public language that that's what's going on. And yet when I say it, you can go, well, Jesus, anybody knows that. That's high school psychology. No, it's not. No, it's not. Not when you're involved with it. And as far as affecting it, in this case, you don't have to really do an imitation of him. You can. But here's all you got to do. Is stop doing what you're doing. That's all. Just stop it. Do something else. And this increasing passion he has over you doing what you're doing to try to stop him will stop. And he realizes, well, you're not all that good looking. The reason I brought this up, since it's not connected to anything, was to try to get you to specifically see that here is just another example that no matter what language you speak publicly, which that includes all of your life experiences, you could have majored in psychology, you could have your PhD in psychology, you could be a psychiatrist, you could be a religious leader, you could be the president of the United States, of the Floyd Nation. There would be nothing out there. There's nothing in the language publicly to tell you that. Just this, that little thing I just told you of how to get somebody off your back. The information is not there. And don't get fooled that when I said, I admitted to you that I put it in a certain way, and that many people's nervous system could say, well, wait a minute, that's just, that's high school psychology. Anybody knows that. You don't know that. If you knew that, this wouldn't happen to you, right? You do not know that. That knowledge is not in the public language. It is not in the general flow of energy in the human nervous system, which is what I was going to get at. It is neither in the private domain of language. People do not figure this out. Not because they're dumb, not because they don't have enough education. The molecular structure in the mainstream, the main brain stream of life, stem of life, if you want to look at it that way, that kind of cellular structure is not yet present in the places where humans live. And yet I can point it out to the right kind of people, the handful of people on this planet that I can apparently talk to now, and then go, yeah. Of course, then it's somewhat of a struggle, because at times you've heard this. Some of you, this is not the first time you ever heard me say this, and you'll write it down again, or you go, God, I got to remember that. Because every time you hear it, you know it's not open to discussion. There's nothing to resist. There's nothing to push against. You just know that's true. And of course, many of you, I made you go do something like that. And so you really got to be dumb. You got to deny that an extraordinary piece in the past happened. Because I made some of you a long time ago, some of you older people, go out and you had to tell me specifically who it was that was bugging you, and I made you go do it. That is, go and imitate the mother. And what happened? Exactly what I told you would happen. The person looked like they had gotten hit by the planet Jupiter. It's fail-safe. It always works. All you got to do to anybody, even if you don't dislike them, I'm not telling you to go do it, all you got to do to anybody is go up and do an imitation of them, and they go, and they will not, as a side effect, they will not have much occasion to ever socialize with you again. They don't know why. They won't speak bad about you. They don't even want to talk about you. They don't want anything to do with you. They're not mad, as I said, but they just know. There's no danger of those folks ever going to dance with you again. They won't even think about it. But notice there is nothing out there in what I'm calling tonight the public language to tell you that. It is not known in the halls of academia where they teach psychology. It is not known in the laboratories of psychiatrists. I can go say what I just said, and the same as I could speak for city intelligence. People in the street would go, oh, I know what you're talking about. Well, then certainly you know that the psychologists and psychiatrists, I pointed this out, they go, oh, and they may even have a term. They go, well, all you're saying is projecting them, their own personality traits, some of them that you find overbearing. You're just saying project it back on them, and they probably come with some theory if they could think fast enough. But they don't know that. They would not go, wait a minute, Jesus. Back to my first story now. Jesus. This group of neurobiologists go, wow, that guy just described the way that the brain works in a certain manner, and we never saw it. That isn't what they said. What'd they tell him? They said, that's interesting, I know what you're saying, but it's physically impossible that that could happen. Except the guy thought, which he'd been the only one that could think, would go, well, if that's true, how was I able to describe it and you understood it? You can't go anywhere. If he'd said that to them, they'd have gone almost like reversing the energy I just told you. They'd have to go, get this man out of here. This man doesn't know what he's talking about. But for them to say physically, you understand what I mean by physically? I'm saying that here it is, scientists, people that gave that man a hearing and listened to what he said and followed it. It was nice and straightforward. He put it to them, and he might have said, do you understand what I'm describing? And they all went, yeah. And he said, well, all right, that was it. And he sat down, and they said, well, thank you. It was an interesting theory and idea, but we know enough to tell you that physically, materially, but physically, the brain cannot operate that way. That can't be the solution. That can't be what we're talking about here, the answer we're looking for. The brain, by everything we know, and we know enough to say categorically the brain cannot do that. And he thought, if so, how did mine describe it? How could I describe something that can't be true? How could my brain picture something that could not be true? That could not happen? And how did your brain hear it and go, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but that's impossible? The information of me saying, do somebody, back to themselves. The psychiatrists, psychologists, people in the city could hear that and go, well, all right, I know what you're saying. And if I said, no, you don't, or you'd use it. It'd straighten your life out. Whatever problems you think you've got with people around here, competitors, family, you would use it. Then, though of course they wouldn't use these terms, but they would be in this position now in my first story of going, well, wait a minute. You don't know what you're talking about, come to think about it, because you don't have any credentials, and physically that's not possible. You might make up some example, and if I tried it, if we got some students to try it under controlled conditions, it might work. I don't know, statistically, I'm just guessing, but it might work, 1 out of 10 times. And I say, no, it'll work every damn time. No, it can't. Nothing works every damn time. That's why I got a degree and you don't. We know there's no such thing that works all the time. Nothing.